Welcome back, everyone, to Aging Well, Finding Beauty in the Gray. Niamh McAnally is an Irish-born best-selling author, keynote and corporate speaker, former TV director, and the youngest daughter of the late BAFTA award-winning actor Ray McAnally and actor Ronnie Masterson. Niamh has traveled all over the world, and we're going to hear about some of that in our time today. She has lived and worked as a volunteer in many island nations in the Caribbean and in the South Pacific. Her first book, Flares Up, a story bigger than the Atlantic, about two men who crossed the Atlantic in a rowboat, of all things. This book was shortlisted for the 2023 Sunday Times Vikki Orvice Award. She followed up with her memoir, Following Sunshine, A Voyage Around the Mind, Around the World, Around the Heart. Here is what Liam Neeson had to say about this book. Gripping and heartfelt, Niamh's beautifully written memoir unfolds with warmth, courage, and a touch of cinematic magic. It is a must-read for anyone seeking inspiration and a deeper connection to the world. I will take one small issue with what Liam had to say there, if I must, or if I may. And he said it has a touch of cinematic magic. I would say it has much more than a touch of cinematic magic. So uh, we are going to chat more about this. But first of all, I will say, Niamh McAnally, welcome. Thank you for joining us on the show today.
Thank you so much, Hugh. Lovely to be with you.
It is a joy to chat with you, and we're going to jump right into this. Um, so your memoir, Following Sunshine, you begin with, in the prologue, you begin with a stunning account of a deep seawater rescue in Belize, just off the coast of Belize. Um, and it just goes from there. It is quite a ride all the way through this book. Can you share a little bit about that story with our listeners? I think it gives a sense of your constitution and your character, but if you would share a little bit about that account with our folks.
Certainly. Yes, I was living on this tiny island off the coast of Belize, about 15 miles offshore, and I had come there to volunteer for, at the time they were called Coral Key Conservation, a UK volunteer project. And the idea was that we were to map the underwater topography of the reef, because Belize has the second largest reef system in the world after Australia. And we were there for a few months living on this tiny island. And in the mornings, we would dive about 30-meter dives, and in the afternoons was the shallow dives. And on this particular dive this morning, I was leading a group of 4 people, and in the front it's myself mapping out the topography, underwater topography, sorry, and another guy doing fish, and behind me was the person doing algae and invertebrates, and also the other person doing corals and sponges. Well, the person doing the algae and inverts, it's such a tiny little the organisms are so small, she had to get down real close. I turned around and she was actually upside down, like her head to the seafloor and her feet towards the surface. And we were 30 meters underwater, which is about 100 feet. And there was something not right because she had a slate. Normally, you have your slate in your hand and a little pencil, and you're making your notes. Well, the slate was floating above her head, which meant she wasn't holding it anymore. And I swam back and I realized she was unconscious. And I had been trained as a scuba instructor how to rescue a diver from underwater, but I'd never actually done it for real. There had always been drills. So I managed to get everybody's attention and abort the dive. And one of the things for non-scuba divers is there is a protocol that you need to ascend at a proper rate of ascent in order to avoid the nitrogen in your system creating bubbles in your bloodstream as you rise to the surface. So you have to kind of time it. Also, what you have to manage is the air expanding in your body as the ambient pressure around you is decreasing on your way up. So you have to get now normally for a person who's conscious, you just breathe out, breathe in, breathe out normally, and it balances on your way up. But for somebody who's unconscious, you've got to get that air up and out of their lungs. So that was part of my job was to kind of it's a gentle push or a punch on the tummy and hold her head back so that the air is escaping. And we got to the surface just before we broke the surface. She came to, thankfully, but we monitored her and got her back on the boat, and then we had a doctor on shore who monitored her. But it was let's put it this way: I took me a little while to get over the adrenaline rush that we made it work.
Well, and yes, and I think that is a wonderful metaphor for a number of experiences that we have to manage in life, and we need to find that right rhythm, that right balance, and certainly your description of it, my eyes were bugging out as I was reading it, but also I just was taken by what seemed to be your focus and your intention and your presence to that experience. And my goodness, for the remainder of the book, there were plenty of accounts of circumstances in which I think you needed to really find your balance. And that's not to say that that's any of us has times of kind of losing it and we don't know which way is up ourselves. But anyways, it was a remarkable way to start the book, and I think just really kind of got us going with it. So it's a really nice way to go with that.
Thank you.
So as you then go into the book in chapter one, and you start to share a little bit about what set this whole journey up for you. And certainly you hail from hardy stock, acting stock with your parents, and um, so you were actually finding your own path in the industry, in the television and movie industry. Made it to the States, made it out to Los Angeles, before curving in another direction. What moved you onto this different path?
Well, one of the things that I gleaned from growing up in a family that was a theatrical family and two freelance actors was that nothing is permanent. We can guarantee one thing in our life, and that is change. And it taught me to be unafraid of uncertainty and to embrace that boldness and the concept that we can always reinvent ourselves no matter what stage we're at in life. Now, I know a lot of time people, obviously some of your listeners as well, are going through that phase, maybe where they're finishing work and now we're getting into retirement. We're talking about aging gracefully in the gray. My upbringing, in a way, brought it to me early on in my life. I've had lots of mini retirements, if you like. So I've worked at 5 different industries and finally settled on the one I'm really supposed to be doing, which is writing. That's really my it's not just my passion, but it's the part of the talent that was given to me. And I've learned my craft now and really keep working on that. But I knew when I was 12 years of age that there was a bigger world outside than Ireland. And what happened was my dad had taken us on a family vacation to Spain. And I grew up in Ireland, which is a beautiful country and especially beautiful when the sun shines. But it also rains a lot. And if anybody like lives in the Seattle area, you know what I'm talking about, that kind of gray cloud. And we were on this holiday. I was 12 years of age in Spain. I went, wait a minute, it's February. There is sun shining in other countries in the middle of winter. Nobody told me this before. So I was like, as soon as I'm old enough, I actually asked for an atlas for my birthday. And as soon as I was old enough, I was going to start traveling. And that's what I did. And part of it too, the first experience was I went off to school in Paris. I thought that would be a great start. And what I learned there from being in an international class at the Sorbonne was different people, different cultures, such a diversity. And I thought, I want to go and meet these people. I want to go and live where they are. And at the time, I was actually a jeune fille au pair, which was meant I was working in the family. I was minding the children, while I was going to school. That taught me the difference between being a traveler and being a tourist. Because if you want to really understand a community and another person's way of life, you've got to live in the community and become part of it. And for those reasons, then as my life developed and part of what the book is about, the middle section, which is a voyage around the world, is my time traveling as a volunteer and living in various different communities, mostly remote, because I'm not really a city girl.
Well, and it's interesting, and we'll certainly come back to and talk more about that. But as we meaning folks that are approaching or in the third age, Two of the high flying considerations for many folks include travel and also volunteering. I think most folks may consider that on a somewhat more sedate scale in their, well, certainly the volunteering in their communities. And that is wonderful. That is a beautiful thing. But it's an intriguing consideration to think about travel and volunteering together. Why not? It's a beautiful thing, and it's certainly a way to get a very different quality of experience in seeing the world, and certainly that was yours. So, and we'll chat more about that. But your first book fires up a story bigger than the Atlantic. So that what compelled that story happened more towards the end of the time that is included in the memoir. But that was your first book. What were the motivations for you to write your memoir?
Well, it's interesting. And I mean, within the publishing industry, things happen slowly and they go sideways. Actually, the memoir was written first.
Okay,
And
I was curious.
yes, it wasn't picked up right away. And so then I ended up with this experience of writing Flares Up, which is a story big in the Atlantic about two lads from England who rowed 3,000 nautical miles across the Atlantic. And I happened to be on a sailboat in Antigua when they came ashore, and I took this iconic photograph, which became the front cover, at the moment where they hold their hand
Right.
held flares up, right?
Mhm.
So what was interesting about that, once that got up and running and published, we then got into lockdown and the pandemic happened. And during that period of time, I went back to the memoir and I brought the ending up to the point of Flares Up of the moment I took that photograph. So I kind of brought us up and through the experience of the pandemic, so it wasn't out of date, if you like. So that's how how the memoir
I
came
see.
about. It was there in the beginning. Most of it was already there, including the final story, which is A Voyage Around the Heart. But I wanted to show how I got to that point in Flares Up, which now it
Sure.
kind of serves for everybody who's loved Flares Up. Now it's kind of like a prequel. Well, how did that start? It's almost like Star Wars. Let's go back and explain how they
Yes,
started,
yes.
right?
Yeah.
That idea.
Well, let's stay with that for a minute with respect to craft in terms of writing. So, you did write the memoir first, much of it, and you tailored it towards the end there, and then you did Flares Up. How did those two projects, how were they similar? How were they different? What did you take from those?
Very interesting question. And let me preface it by saying I've told Gary, my husband, that the next book, it has to be fiction because the first, when I was writing Flares Up, it was all about getting into the mindset and the minds of two men that from England that I only just met. And that took a whole year of interviewing them via Zoom during lockdown and phone calls and emails, etc. And I used to joke, I used to wake up in the morning, I'd turn around to Gary and I'd say, I'm so sorry. And he'd say, what's wrong? I said, you're the third man I thought about this morning because I was living and eating and breathing these two guys, Paul and Phil. And the interesting thing about that, it was a true story. And I had to be cognizant of their friends, their family, their real lives. And yet at the same time, I wanted it to read like a novel. So that's how I wrote it. It's all written in the third person, but it reads like a novel. As soon as you start reading it, it takes off in the story. And the story is not about how to row across the ocean. It's about why they did it, how it affected their families, and how the experience changed them as human beings. So set that aside. So that was done, and then I'm back into the memoir, and now I'm being true to my own story, and everything in there is true. And again, it's written in a style that carries you along, I believe, a bit like you said, like as soon as you got into that opening scene in underwater, and my goal with it is to show that experiences that I was having, it's not a travelogue per se. It happens to take place in various, locations around the world. But the idea is to bring up the themes of what I was dealing with in my life that and anything that's relatable that somebody else can look at and go say, oh yeah, actually I've been experiencing that in a different style. But yes, I understand. And the final joke of it all is I said, okay, the third book has to be fiction. I just want to make stuff up now.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, Well, so let's get a little bit more into the book. And so, of course, life is a series of adventures if we but say yes. And you did find your own path. Um, you talked early in the book about your addiction to minimalism. There was the one time, and this was before you set off for Harm and Sark.
Sark, yeah.
Yes,
Yeah,
and
Herm and Sark, yeah.
Herm and Sark, yes. And
Hmm.
you had to sell off your beloved kayak and
Mm.
watch that sort of go off, on the hood of a car that for the folks who took it. So um, certainly there are different ways, not that we have to make these line up completely, but for folks who are at different stages, coming in and through retirement, downsizing is an experience. We've just had someone on to chat about that on the podcast. And um, let's talk a little bit about minimalism. What's the appeal, and what does it represent for you?
I think it started at the time of my father's death. Items that were super important to him after he died, for me, I suddenly looked at it. One, I have an example in the book about it was a jam jar that used to sit on his desk that was full of rubber bands and paper clips because he never knew when he might need one. And that was just that was an important thing. And then after he died, it was like, well, any meaning it had died with him. Now it's just a jam jar. And do I need a jam jar? No, I don't. And I started to get into the concept, especially if you're going to travel, that I can travel the world lightly with as little possessions as possible. And I've actually downsized down to, two suitcases twice in my life. One was leaving Ireland initially. And the second time, like you said, was when I had been in America for a little while and I was now heading back towards the Channel Islands in the U between the UK and France. And I sold everything down, including the kayak, off the roof of my car. In fact, it's I'll give you a laugh. I drove to the airport, and I had a car, and I drove to the airport right before the airport in Orlando. And I went into CarMax and I said, yeah, I need to sell my car. And they were, oh, okay. I said, but can you help me take it for a test drive? I said, oh, we don't need to test drive. We can look up the VIN number, etc. I said, no, I really need you to take it for a test drive. So anyway, they agreed to that. And I said, could we go out here? And it's 2 miles to the right. And when we got to near Orlando Airport, I said, just pop the trunk. I took out my two suitcases and went in for my flight. I said, see ya. We'd already done the deal. So that was it. So I was going to Sark, this tiny island in the Channel Islands. It's 3.5 miles long by a mile and a half wide. No cars, no paved roads per se, accessible only by ferry. And like I said, I'm not a city girl. I absolutely loved it. And to me, I had been living in Los Angeles prior to that, and the contrast was stark. Los Angeles to me was, and this is probably an unfair generalization, but the amount of people I met that were all on the road of accumulation and materialism. And what I was noticing was, yes, they were accumulating amusing and not amusing, gorgeous stuff, but they still weren't happy. And I was like, well, things don't make you happy. It's what we're all after is the feeling something gives us. And that could be a feeling we get from being in somebody's company, watching a sunset, being around nature, any of that kind of thing. So the actual items don't make you happy. The money in the bank doesn't make you happy. Yes, it provides opportunities. Don't get me wrong. I mean, for me, I was able to save some money and I was actually able to do some of those plane rides when I was going around the world, even though I wasn't, paying for food and lodging because I was volunteering and I had a roof over my head. But it's the feeling that you go for. And so then I realized the items weren't important. I needed a certain amount of items for, basic living. Like you need something to wear. They really can't go out in public with no clothes on. So items then became functional. If something was functional. And I also thought that if something you hadn't used something in 6 months, unless it was a seasonal item like something for Christmas, or decoration like that, you really don't need it. And one of the things, like let's look at our wardrobes, and I'm going through a thing now with my own wardrobe, is I often look at my laundry. Because if you look at your laundry basket, that's what you're wearing all the time, and you keep turning the same stuff. So let's have a look at the back of the closet. What hasn't gone in your laundry recently? Well, does it not fit you? Or is it past the style? Is it time to move it on? That kind of thing. So I like to use stuff for functional reasons.
Very well said. And I hope that a number of our listeners who may be in the direct process or coming up to the process of downsizing, that they will be able to take these words to heart and just have a different way of approaching that process and the need to.
Yeah, and one thing to add to that though, there, especially when somebody has passed on, if if the item had meaning for the other person and it doesn't have any meaning for you, then you're not obligated to keep it. However, if it has major meaning, emotional meaning for you, well, then you should keep it. I mean, that's a personal decision.
Yes.
And you can everything, nothing has any meaning except the meaning you give it, right?
Yes.
So
So
and
true.
what you
So
attach
true.
to it. But yeah, if you are generally looking to downsize, not just in your lifestyle but also in your possessions, why not? I'll give you an example. There was a painting done of me standing in the wings in the Abbey Theatre in Dublin years ago, when I was very young and I was acting myself. And I had it for years. And then I set off traveling and it was in storage in a friend's house. And then I thought, well, what am I going to do with that eventually? I went, I know, I'm going to bequeath that. I knew exactly who I was going to give it to after I died. Right. And I thought, well, why don't I just give it to her now?
Why wait?
Right.
Hmm.
I don't have a wall to hang it on right now. I got a backpack on my back. That's about it. Why don't I just give it to her now? So that's the other way you can downsize and still have it within your kind of aura, if you like.
So well said. So well said. And as I'm listening to you, and this may sound like a bit of a tangent, but there's another word coming to my mind, and I think it maybe is also being influenced by the book itself. Resilience, and what's necessary for resilience, what's involved in resilience, and certainly it is your story in a number of ways. It's many of our story. You recount those experiences in Following Sunshine. Certainly when you went to Sark and you were supposed to have the one job and then that fell through and then you were able to find your way into the other one and then things changed there and that set you off to the other side of the world and actually you had a bit of an inauspicious start to your time volunteering. Could you share a little bit about that first experience when you were leaving Sark and going to the South Pacific?
Was that the one down in Malaysia? Is that the one you're thinking about?
Yes,
Yes,
yes, and
yes, yes,
yes,
yes,
yes.
yes. Resilience has been a word that's been attached to me a couple of times, and it's a bit like, you see somebody rescuing somebody in a bad situation. People call them a hero, and the person themselves says, "I'm not a hero. I just did what I did." And I feel the same way when people say, "Oh, you're very resilient." Like, how do you explain that? And I think what it is all of us have that within us. When you're faced with something, you make a decision and you act because you have to, right? But the first volunteer project or one of the first ones I did was in Malaysia, and it was to help someone who had a sunset cruise business, and they were serving food for these tourists that were going to be out on the sunset. It was going to be gorgeous. And having worked in hotels on Sark and also in America, I had worked a lot with food safety. And what I saw was very scary, like seriously scary stuff. And I thought, I'm only here. This one was a test run. It was only a 3-week project I was supposed to be on. And I thought, I'm not going to be here long enough to educate the people running this program, to really look at, you might poison somebody if you keep going the way you're going. And yet at the same time, I couldn't go ahead with their protocols. I mean, they wanted me to mix, they wanted me to mix mayonnaise into coleslaw with my hands, no gloves, no water to wash my hands, all that kind of thing. And I'm saying that's not very healthy, etc. So after, again, listening to my gut, and this is one thing that traveling has taught me, has learned me as well, um, is that you do need to listen to your instincts. And if anything I've learned throughout my life, and I've been bad at it in the early stages of ignoring it and getting myself into all sorts of trouble. I listened to my gut instincts and I said, Niamh, this is not the right place for you right now. You cannot help in this situation. These people are not going to change. And you're either going to come combative with them, but it'd be better just to withdraw. And so that's the decision I made. I said, this doesn't feel right. It's time to walk away. And there's things in my life I had to relook at times where I go, this doesn't seem right. I'm going to walk away. And you kind of, it's like that sliding doors moment. What would have happened had I stayed? The whole butterfly effect, if you like. And in this case, I know it was the right decision. And one of the things my dad had taught me was when you make a decision, it's like as though you have from, and is it Latin or Greek? He used to always say, "Oh, it's from this." He was very good with etymology of words. But he say, "Oh, it means to blah 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 to cut in half. Therefore, you're choosing one half and discarding the other." But the other part of it was, if after making a decision you suddenly feel lighter in yourself, then you've made the correct decision. So that kind of led me to that. But I didn't want to give up on volunteering. I just knew that was the wrong project for me. So I went
Right.
back to SARC. That was like a short winter holiday from SARC.
Sure, sure. And of course, that was one among many adventures in volunteering that you had over the course of that time. And in fact, so that was an inauspicious start. Eventually, many adventures later, you made your way back to Florida. And here's a line in your book, Following Sunshine, in chapter 37. The time had come to take measure of the man called Captain Gary Krieger. Can you share more about this experience?
Yes, I can. So I had finished a year circumnavigating as a volunteer, and I was about to sort of settle down and do some should stuff, like I should like get back to work, etc. And I found this final project, which was to help crew a sailboat for a solo sailor from Florida to the Bahamas, and it was only supposed to last 1 month. And my family at the time said to me, "Are you insane? You're going to go to sea with someone you've never met. How do you know he's not an axe murderer?" And I didn't know at the time. His friends were saying to him was, this is somebody you've never met. You're going to let her come on your boat. How do you know she's not a modern day pirate who 12 miles offshore is going to relieve you of your boat? So anyway, so again, in this instance, I trusted my gut and I went, no, this is going to be fine. And I can read a situation. So I get on the boat and I can tell you this. At first, it was like, okay, hello, hi, how are you? How are you? And there was no nothing other than the fact that we're going to have to get along. And we're going to be living in a 40-foot space 24/7 hours a day with no cell phone, no internet, no Wi-Fi, etc. And I had a little bit of sailing experience. Obviously, I'd worked on boats a lot from scuba diving, but I had a little bit of sailing experience. And off we set. And as time went by and we started talking more and more and more, we realized we both had a very similar mindset and an outlook on life. And he had a master's degree in spiritual psychology. I had spent a year as a platinum partner with Tony Robbins. So I was coming from that mindset of, how to live your life more meaningfully. And we used to get really, really talk. And then we got into a situation in the Bahamas where we really needed to trust each other. We were kind of in what I call a coral garden, but we were actually kind of up against a lot of coral heads and trying to maneuver our way. And I went out on deck and he was on the helm and we were talking to each other for 90 minutes via hand signals. It's like, I'm telling him, you need to turn the boat now, you need to do this, you need to do that. And we realized after that it was a bond had formed between us. And we learned also that we were both keen photographers. And little by little, this friendship grew between us. And then about halfway down the Bahama chain, it was like this little spark ignited between us. Now, neither of us were looking for a relationship. He had come out of a long-term marriage. He talk about somebody who's finding the beauty in the gray. He had retired from a long-time career and a long-time marriage, and at 60 something decided he was going to learn how to sail. He was going to buy a boat. He was going to move aboard, and he was going to sail off into the sunset. So pretty impressive. And my job was to obviously, help him get to where he needed to go. But anyway, so we connected at such a profound, deep level. And then I started to have feelings for him. But at the end of 4 months, we brought the boat back to Florida and we said goodbye. And do you know how I knew it was really an important relationship? It was because when we said goodbye, I was okay to let him go. There was a boo-hoo scene. I was very sad, but I knew somewhere it was like, you know what? I don't know what it is we had together, but I know that I have become a better version of myself because of the experience of us being together. And that's how I knew this was a really, really good human being. And lo and behold, 3 weeks later, he calls me up, "Hey, you want to go sailing again?" And we took off and we started sailing all through the Bahamas and up through Ireland, sorry, up to
Canada. Yeah.
up towards Maine and everything else.
Man,
And then he met everybody in the family, and I met his, and then we took it from there.
and the rest, as they say, is history.
Almost.
Yes,
I
almost.
mean,
It
the
says
joke, there's
being
a line in the
yeah.
book, there's a line in the book where it says that Gary was allergic to pecans and relationships. And I can tell you now he's still allergic to pecans. But it was after about 4 years he proposed on the deck, and then we got married. I guess we're 4.5 years married now. So we're 8.5 years together. After I was only
Wonderful.
supposed to stay 1 month.
Yes. Well, I was going to ask you a question about what perspective or perspectives you have gained across your adventures, but I think you do a really nice job of summing that up at the end of the book. And so I'm not going to ask that because I want our listeners to get the book and they'll be getting a sense of it throughout the book, but you do a really nice job of bringing that together at the end of the book. So I'm going to leave that as a teaser for our listeners. But I do want to ask, what is ahead for you? You spoke about looking at the next book and being a fiction book. Any other things that you see on the horizon for you or you and Gary?
Well, yeah, that's two different things actually.
Hmm.
Believe it or not, now Gary is actually working with me in the business. He's now my business manager for the Writer on the Water, which is where I'm based out of, which is my website. And we are also guest speakers on celebrity cruises. So we give a lot of talks on what is it really like to live on a sailboat, or how can two people who live 5,000 or grew up 5,000 miles apart, how do we end up together on this stage? And a lot about finding meaning through traveling, how that concept, and he had done a lot of volunteer work himself. So that's what we as a couple are doing. On my writing side, I also founded an international writers group about back in 2020. And over the last 4 years, I've hosted monthly Zoom meetings and tried to encourage everybody along on their own writing path. And I'm happy to say I've curated an anthology of their short stories, and we'll have that coming out next May. And then in the meantime, then I will, once I've got that off the desk, then I'll be settling down into my own writing as well and continuing. The beauty now is that Gary and I are two different ages, and he's a little bit older than me. So what we've decided to do is, rather than my lock myself into a room for the next year writing the next book, I really want us to spend some quality time together because every day is important. We don't know how long we're going to have. And so that's our goal. And so now this beautiful thing of working together on the cruise ships, we're back on the water, and there's somebody else is in charge of the weather, somebody else is in charge of the galley, somebody else is coming in to work on the rooms and the staterooms. So that's amazing next chapter for us.
It sounds heavenly. And so it's wonderful to hear all of these different projects that are going on. And you referenced your website. We will have information for our listeners to learn everything about you and how to get to you and see some of this good work that you are doing and what is coming. But we will pause for now and say, Niamh McAnally, it is just a joy to chat with you and to hear more about Following Sunshine and just the adventures that you are on. And again, it is a wonderful book, and I certainly commend all of our listeners to do check this book out. It is available, and you can learn more about how to access it by going to Niamh's website, which we will put in the show notes. Niamh McAnally, thank you so much for joining us. We wish you and Gary all the best in the time ahead.
Thank you so much, Hugh, and thank you everybody for listening in.